David Deutchmann lives far from Cuba and Latin America. Far away, but only in geographical terms, because in terms of love it feels both Cuban and Latin American. David is Australian, but for more than 30 years he has been linked to Cuba and his history. In the 80s, he founded Ocean Press Publishing House with his partner, and in 2006, he created Ocean Sword. Inspired by ethnic, cultural, and gender diversity, Ocean Sword aims for national autonomy and has an anti-imperialist spirit. Also, it develops multiple editorial lines that disseminate the demands and projects of social transformation in Latin America. With David Deutchmann, president of Ocean Sword, we have the pleasure to talk today and from Havana. Thank you, David, so much for accept this offer to talk to you and to tell us about the life and the history in Ocean Press and Ocean Sword here in Cuba. It's a pleasure for us.
It's great to be here.
Tell me, first of all, how did Cuba came into your life? When was the first time you heard about Cuba? Because I have to say you're from Australia. It's really far from us in history and culture and in pretty much everything.
Actually, the first time I heard about Cuba, it wasn't really about Cuba. This is an odd story, but I was 7 years old, and I remember asking one of my primary school teachers in 1962 whether there was going to be a war, because people in our family, everyone was talking about a possible war. I didn't know that Cuba was involved in that. I'm talking about the Cuban Missile Crisis.
That's a complicated time.
And so I remember that conversation, 7 years old, asking one of my primary school teachers, without, of course, thinking specifically about Cuba. I was involved, like many people from my generation, in the social protest movements of the late 1960s, the early 1970s. For example, in my country, Australia, there was a very strong movement against our country's involvement in the war in Vietnam, because unfortunately, Australia militarily supported the United States in the war in Vietnam. So there was a very big social movement in my country against Australia's participation in that war. And so I was part of that. My whole generation was radicalized, politicized by that. And obviously through that, we came into contact with Cuba. We heard about Cuba, we knew about Cuba. And so in the 1970s, I was one of the founders in Australia of the movement in solidarity with Cuba. The Australia-Cuba Friendship Association, it's called. I was also one of the founders of the first Solidarity Brigade from Australia to Cuba, which is called the Southern Cross Brigade. And we established this solidarity movement, the Australia-Cuba Friendship Society, in the late 1970s. I was for quite a long period of time the president of that association. And I visited Cuba for the first time in 1985. That is 34 years ago. It was my first visit here. And so I came to Cuba as part of a visit that was sponsored by the Cuban Institute of Friendship with the Peoples, ICAP. And that was my first contact with Cuba in 1985. I was here and I was involved in book publishing, and so ICAP took me to meet Cuban book publishers. That wasn't my intention, but that was my first contact with the Cuban publishing industry in 1985.
You were in the publishing business, sort of speaking. So now, how was Ocean Press born, and why did you create it?
Yeah, I was working at that time in the United States for a book publisher, and that's where I learned about book publishing, learned to be a book editor. And my partner and I, my wife and I, we returned to Australia, and we decided to continue our relationship with Cuba, and because we were now book publishers, we decided to create a book publisher that had a specific identity with Cuba. And so in 1989, exactly 30 years ago, we created Ocean Press as a small, independent, 100% independent, not linked to any political party, not linked to any other project, just publishing books. And the first book we published in 1989 was a book that we prepared by Fidel Castro. It was a selection of Fidel Castro's speeches to the non-aligned nations movement. The book is called The Right to Dignity. And it's a small book, but it was the first book we published, a book by Fidel Castro.
Well, I mean, if you take these speeches, they were really, really, really long and strong speeches at the time. Why did you create how do you came up with the idea of establish your editorial line just with Cuba? You never thought about you know, spreading your ideas to work with other countries, with other nations?
Well, we did. We did, because almost the same time we established contact in South Africa. This was before the end of apartheid.
So in
but
the
we
80s, still in the 80s.
That's right. But we established contact with the African National Congress, the ANC, and the South African Communist Party, and so we began to publish books about the anti-apartheid struggle in English. We also began to publish books about Central America. For example, we published a book called "I Was Never Alone" by a woman comandante of the FMLN in El Salvador, Nidia Diaz. And so we published books about Central America, about El Salvador, about Nicaragua, Guatemala. We published books about South Africa. At the same time as we were beginning to publish these books about Cuba and about the Cuban Revolution. So we were expanding our editorial line.
And what's behind the name? Ocean Press, Ocean Sword. It's become Australia. What?
No, to be honest, it actually has no meaning. I mean, different people have perhaps given it meaning over the years. No, we just decided to establish a publishing house that obviously had a political objective. It had a left-wing objective, because we were left-wing. We are left-wing, explicitly left-wing, because we wanted to sell books in the United States in particular. Even though we created Ocean Press in Australia, we had many professional relationships, commercial relationships in the United States. And we always saw the United States as our main market where we would sell books. And that was our goal. And so we didn't want to have a name that was explicit. We didn't want to called Vanguard Books or left-wing books. And so it has a name that really doesn't mean very much. I mean, Australia, Australia is surrounded by oceans.
And
so
oceans are the link between countries also. So you can
sure,
go that way.
I accept your interpretation. I accept that.
So you were talking about the profits you need to make. I mean, every business needs to be profitable, and you need that to sell in the United States, sell in Europe, sell everywhere. How do you deal with the fact that, for example, here in Cuba, your books are not expensive, not really expensive, but you spend a lot of money to make a book, but then you sell it to the young people and to the Cubans in really low prices. How do you deal with profitability and to the ethical thing, to spread the word and to spread the knowledge, to your social commitment?
No, Ocean Press and Ocean Sword have to be financially, economically viable, because otherwise it wouldn't exist. Ocean Press now recently celebrated 30 years. We have survived 30 years publishing hundreds and hundreds of books in English, hundreds and hundreds of books in Spanish, without ever having received 1 cent from a government, from a party, from a foundation, from an NGO. Ocean is 100% independent. Every cent that we have received in 30 years has come from the sale of books. And so your question is a really important question, because I think we have shown that you can create an alternative
Editorial project, yes.
publishing project, political project, that isn't motivated by profit but has to be profitable. And ocean is profitable. We actually make a profit, but we use that profit in order to subsidize the sale of books in Central America, here in Cuba. We publish books mainly for the tourist market here in Cuba, but we also publish books for one COC, dos COC, tres COC that are sold here in the Cuban national market. And so that's how we use our profit. I'll give you an example. In the year 2004, 2004, in the United States, we had the good fortune to publish the book, The Motorcycle Diaries by Ernesto Che Guevara, at the time when the film, The Motorcycle Diaries, was released in the United States. In 1 year, we sold 400,000 copies in English and 45,000 copies in Spanish of The Motorcycle Diaries just in the United States. Almost 500,000 copies of Che Guevara's Motorcycle Diaries in the United States. And that was extremely profitable. And so we used that money in order to publish Che in Spanish in Latin America, because that's why we created Ocean Sud in 2006, because we said that it wasn't correct that we were publishing Che Guevara in English for the United States, for England, for Canada, for Australia, but Che Guevara wasn't readily available, wasn't as available in Latin America. So we created Ocean Sud to publish Che Guevara and many other authors in Latin America at subsidized prices, using the money that we gained in the United States. And that's really been the logic of Ocean Press and Ocean Sud in these 30 years.
In that line, Che Guevara is really enigmatic and it's like a movie star for a lot of people because of his life and because of what he did. But why do you think people in the world is so amazed by the revolutionary processes, and why people like to read about revolutionary processes, and what does revolutionary processes have to teach to other countries, and why do you think this is important?
We as Ocean Press and Ocean Sud, we have a privilege that we have a relationship with the Che Guevara Study Center here in Cuba that allows us to be the exclusive publishers of Che Guevara, the books of Che Guevara, outside of Cuba. And so we have the exclusive rights to the books of Che Guevara outside of Cuba in all languages. And so we've helped have Che published in Italy, in Japan, in Germany, in France, in Turkey, in India, in many languages in the 18 years that we have worked with the Che Guevara Study Center. Che Guevara is obviously one of those icons, political icons, who 50 years later still inspires young people. Sometimes I find it difficult to explain because I was someone who was also radicalized by Che Guevara in the late 1960s, early 1970s. And so sometimes for me it's extraordinary to see young people today still with their Che Guevara t-shirt, still identifying with Che Guevara, and so he's one of those political icons who has survived. Most don't, but he has. And I think also the Cuban Revolution has, after 60 years, it's still a point of reference. Obviously, in some moments more than others, in some countries more than others. I'm not saying that's always generalised, because it's not. But the fact that we have sold so many books by Che Guevara testifies to that. I'll give another example. This experience in 2004 in selling Che Guevara's Motorcycle Diaries in the United States. That year, in the New York Times, 10 most sold women, and that's, we feel very proud of that, because we as Ocean Press helped to have Che Guevara in that list of 10 most sold books. And you go to the United States today, and in many bookstores, you will find books by Che Guevara, by Fidel Castro, about the Cuban Revolution in English, published by Ocean. Because ocean is independent. Ocean is Australian. Ocean is not a Cuban publisher. We work very much here in Cuba, as we do in many other countries. Ocean is the only non-Cuban book publisher with an office here in Cuba, and so we're sitting now in the Ocean office here in Havana. Um, but Ocean is not Cuban. Ocean is independent. Ocean Press is Australian, and Ocean Sword is Latin American. And I think that that's also part of the secret to the success of Ocean, because when a tourist here in Cuba buys one of our books in a hotel or an airport, because we have 350 sales outlets here in Cuba, 350 in all the hotels, in all the airports, in the tourist stores. So when a tourist buys an Ocean book, they see the logo, Ocean, Australian. They don't see the book as a Cuban book, and it's not in many ways. Although the content of many of those books, of course, is Cuban.
That's. I mean, I never saw it that way. You never had any sort of problem in the United States because of the content of your books. They never try to raise walls on your work.
No, because we're Australian, and it's contradictory because ours is a left-wing project. Ours is a project that opposes U.S. imperialism, but because Australia as a country is a very close military ally of the United States, Australia is with the United States in every war. Australia was with the United States in the war in Korea. Australia was with the United States in the war in Vietnam. Australia was with the United States in the 2 wars in Iraq. Australia today is still with the United States in Afghanistan. And so because of the military alliance, and there are US bases in Australia, and so
That's a contradiction.
I don't want to say that something may or may not happen. And one stage I had my passport confiscated in the United States. I had to go to court in the United States to get my passport back. But I'm an Australian citizen.
So you were talking about the figure of Che Guevara and his presence in the actual times and in the youth. How important is youth in Ocean Sword?
No, we have a policy. Firstly, most of the people who work for Ocean Press and Ocean Sword here in Cuba and in other countries, most of them overwhelmingly are young people in their 20s or early 30s. I'm not saying that we have a prejudice against older people. I mean, I'm the last person to say that, but we encourage young people to be part of Ocean. We also publish many young authors. I mean, for example, at the moment here in Cuba, we are publishing books that have been written by Cuban authors who are 26, 27, 28. We're creating a space, a publishing space here in Cuba.
And where are you working now? I mean, as an editorial house, are you working in some collection right now?
We have at the moment 150 books in process. We have almost, too many
In
books.
process.
Yeah, that's right. We have, books that are being translated, books that are being edited, books that have been formatted and ready to go to the printer. And so it's a massive ongoing project, because we're publishing 30 or 40 new titles every year, as well as republishing old titles. One book, for example, that we have rushed to the printer is an anthology of Camilo Cienfuegos. We've already published 2 small books about Camilo Cienfuegos, but this is an anthology of 320 pages that has a selection of Camilo's letters when he was young, when he travelled to the United States and worked in the United States, and then when he went to Mexico, when he met with Fidel and others in Mexico. The second part of this anthology by Camilo are the letters by Camilo when he was in the Sierra, when he was in the Escambray in the center of Cuba, and the last part of the book is the most surprising for me. is everything by Camilo in the year 1959. And as you know better than I, Camilo disappeared on October 28, 1959. He didn't even live the full year. But almost 1/3 or more of this large anthology is from 1959. It's extraordinary, the number of speeches, the number of interviews that he gave. And I thought I knew quite a bit about Camilo Cienfuegos, having had a lot to do with Cuba over all these many years. But I discovered a new Camilo with this book. I discovered a Camilo much more than the Camilo of jokes and the Camilo just of his image. I mean, Camilo was he was obviously, you know this better than I, he was obviously very Cuban.
Yes, yes,
You know,
yes.
Camilo,
He was a people's guy.
Very, very Cuban.
He was from a neighborhood, really,
Yeah.
from the outside of the city.
Yeah, but what a I mean,
Yeah.
I promised to give you a copy of this book because we're going to launch this book on October 28
I'm looking forward to.
in a month's time, because this is October 28 is the 60th anniversary of the disappearance of Camilo. And it's an important moment to remember Camilo, because Camilo died, I think, at the age of 27. Yeah. Think about that for a moment. 27 years of age when he disappeared, died. And so this book, I think, gives a whole new meaning, a whole new life to who Camilo was. And so I'm just giving that as one example. We're also publishing a book right now which is called Trump versus Cuba, which is a small book written by an exceptional analyst here in Cuba, looking at the in detail at the political offensive by Trump in the 2.5 years that Trump has been in government, and looks at figures like Trump, looks at figures like Bolton, who has just left the administration, Pompeo and others, and it's also a really, really interesting book. So they're the types of books that we're working on at the moment.
I'm really looking forward for that Camilo book.
I promise to give you a copy.
Thank you so much for this, for bringing light on your work and what's Ocean's Work, because there's a lot of people who doesn't know exactly your work. So, yeah.
No, thank you, because I saw the birth of Telesur, because I obviously have a lot to do with Cuba, with Venezuela. I saw Telesur being created, and I've seen the evolution of Telesur over these years, and all of you should feel incredibly proud. It's one of the most important media projects, communication projects, not just in Latin America, but in the whole world in these past 20 years.
Yeah, we needed something.
And so
like
thank you for Telesur existing.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.